Welcome to another episode of Shattering Glass and Heels. Joining me in today's segment are two of my best friends from college, esteemed opera director and customer experience strategist Eric Einhorn, and the one person I trust on stage with me wholeheartedly, accompanist and bestie, Will McDaniel.
So thank you guys again for coming on the podcast. So for the rest of the audience, Will and Eric and I went to school together. So we all went to Oberlin Conservatory of Music, and you're all classmates together. And I think it's a really great story. I think, Will, you play piano. Eric, you and I were both voice majors. We're not going to say how long. It's been a long time that we've all been friends. But as I started to write this book, I was talking about, the power of the network. And I never intentionally thought that I was going to write both of you into the book and the stories that you had, but the creative process, it just went there. And but I just really thought it was a really, really powerful story. And it was something that I wanted to share with everyone, is that, it took me back to a moment in time at Oberlin where, professor really said, take a look at the people in the room, that these are faces that you don't know. These are all strangers when you've walked in, but you're going to walk out of here, especially in your 4 years, building the most valuable relationships that you're ever going to have in your life. And it's such a profound thought. And, as I look back now, it's really crazy, like what the stories of what has happened and how, we've kept in touch. And then when you look at all the people that were in the room with us and our classmates, Grammy Award winners, Pulitzer Prize winners, MacArthur Grant winners, it just, the list of accolades go on. And, although a lot of them work within the arts, and then some of us don't work in the arts anymore, it's just really profound to see that network. And I think I just wanted to really just take a moment to really talk about network and that power of network, and how has that meant for you guys, and how has that manifested within your lives and then school. So I don't know who wants to start first. So Eric, I'm looking at you, so go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this since you first mentioned it, and I call on this kind of idea a lot when, and a lot of it is actually a point of pride with people. Of they're talking about some person who just won some award or released some major new piece of work, and I say to them, we were 18 together in the middle of Ohio, and we were in music theory class together, and there is something so binding about that even if you lose touch with somebody, whenever you reconnect, there is that shared experience that is something that you can't replicate, even if you have worked together as an adult. I think the relationship is different than if you arrive on campus as an undergrad and you form these friendships, which are all that crazy mixture of friendship and figuring out how to be independent and an adult and studying the things that you study. It binds you together differently, and those connections are the ones that are the strongest, as is exhibited by the three of us here today. And it's something that the older I get and the more I am sort of out and about, the network, especially the older pieces of that network, you continue to leverage over and over again. And just when you think you've reached a dead end street, you have to sort of stop and think, well, who are my friends? What are my friends doing? And it's remarkable what you realize and what you overlook. Just the power of the network is never ending.
Well,
yeah, it's a great view on it. A couple other things that also, just using kind of the three of us as a starting point, two things about network is they also evolve over time. I think when you just imagine people as the nodes of this network, like each one of us as individuals is evolving over time and like moving through life. And so those connections, I think rooted, Eric, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like it feels different when you have different connections at the starting point too. And so as we evolve over time, like we blossom in these different ways, but we still have that kind of tie, and it enriches our networks over time as well, I guess is what I'm saying. And also another thing that sticks out is kind of a notion of relativity in terms of your vantage point too, because a network, I think when people talk about networks, our networks are each kind of centered around ourselves, right? But some of the language and some of the ways people think about networks sometimes is often self-limiting, is like more of a pod. It's not a connection of people who are connected together. It's a web of connections that each of us makes as individuals, and we have a different vantage point among the connections that we make. And every other person has a different view of some of those same connections, but also a set of different connections too. And so I think there's kind of this different vantage point in terms of networks too.
I make a really good point, because like I think Eric and I even college had more airtime together because we were both voice students and opera rehearsals and lots of that. And Will, you were always in the periphery, right? And you were not my accompanist in college. But you're always the periphery.
Don't be mad at me.
Wasn't you? But you're always in the periphery of the friends and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until you moved to New York that you and I, started to really spend more time together. And it was really kind of as adults. And I think you're right. There is a moment in time and how that relationship grows, and and how I thought about it. And honestly, I would never have thought doing Carnegie Hall with anyone else but you, because I didn't trust anyone else. So it was just, that was just really kind of like where things kind of evolved. And so I think there is a vantage point in time. There were two stories in particular that brought up in the book that I really want to talk about, because I feel like I'm still in awe of kind of what had transpired and happened. And I think on-site opera and ice. Am I allowed to say ice?
Yes. Editorial rules mention ICE's International Contemporary Ensemble. ICE for sure.
So I just love the fact that, like, we were all students, we were all kids, really, just playing and having fun. For the contemporary ensemble folks, it was just a space that everyone was doing that then turned into over 20 years of a arts organization and a really strong arts organization. I think, Eric, for me, the story of on-site opera is a little bit more closer, because we just wanted more performance space, more airtime, more opera, and there wasn't enough performance venues. And you were kind of venturing out and finding your voice as a director at that time, and really, being, relegated to spaces that weren't really conducive to opera, but like we're figuring it out, right? And that's essentially kind of how that started. To me, is like, that's the story of on-site opera. People are like, oh yeah, that's such a revolutionary idea. I was like, no, we were just students trying to do this, and that's the concept of kind of what came out. I just want you guys to really talk a little bit about that, because I'm on the periphery of that, of just being a supporter of both the organizations through my relationship with both of you, but you guys are really in the heart of creating those organizations, right? Really being in the heart of that. How did that start? And like, was there at any moment in that you really thought, gosh, this is going to be a business, and it's going to be a great business. It's going to be a long-lasting business and a profitable business, and we're all in it together, right? I just really want to figure that out, because it's like, I'm still in awe. Like, it's been like 20-something years, I think, for both organizations, and it's such a great story, because to me, the periphery for me is like, we were all just kids just playing and hanging out and trying to have fun. So I don't know who wants to go first. So, like, guys,
go for it, Will.
Okay. I'll go for it. So interesting you bring up periphery, because that's also how I feel like I was brought into the ICE orbit too. So I mean, I was involved in the contemporary music ensembles at Oberlin. It wasn't the core of what I did, but it was something that I did a lot and was really interested in, and made a lot of connections through that realm. And so I think Claire Chase, one of our founders, was really kind of the nexus in bringing a bunch of people together to kick off this organization. I was still in my senior year when she did it too. Getting this call from her, and like, while I was home for Thanksgiving, saying, "Hey, I'm sending you a plane ticket. Come to Chicago in January." and the rest is history. And so from just kind of being connected to all these people who did a lot of different music with me is how I got pulled into the organization. And so I was one of like many people that were present at the birth of this organization. But as it evolved over time, what had started as a student network and then solidified into kind of its own nexus of connections as we also pulled in other musicians to join the orbit. It evolved over time and it kept growing. My involvement with the group, I played and wrote less for the ensemble over time as people drifted into New York, but I was still central to the board. And I think nonprofit boards are also their own really deep story of network and connections and support, which I'm sure we could devote a full hour just talking to that. But Eric knows, yeah. And so as things moved on, I was still connected kind of administratively through the board. And so as Claire, our founder, after 15 years, she was stepping away and releasing her baby into the wild and professionalizing the administration. And so it was through that continued but evolved connection through the board when we needed to fill in an opening for the executive director. The board tapped me as the right person at the right time to solve some pretty pressing needs at that point in the evolution of the organization. It was really kind of interesting because we had grown meteorically over 12 to 15 years and hadn't quite, we kept outgrowing our own clothes basically every year. And so we were still a ragtag group structured for maybe a $500,000 organization at best, hitting the $2 million mark. And so at that point, we needed to take stock and really kind of mature and form that administration to help support the continued growth. There had to be a lot of really unsexy work that needed to be done to support the really cool, amazing, groundbreaking stuff. And so by this point, I had to kind of become my own professional entity as working through various corporate America roles at this point, and stepped in and was that kind of boring guy to do the tough, boring work to make the really cool stuff happen. And it was really interesting that when I stepped into the role, a lot of the same kind of people and network connections that we had as students at the beginning were still present in the ensemble. We had all evolved and grown as people. And I came in a much different role than I had remembered these peers from all the years ago as students too. And so it was really interesting to think back to the starting days and the kind of arguments over like, how are we going to phrase this? What does this symbol mean? Are you sure you want to make that noise? In rehearsals to coming up with development plans, or like talking about personnel development, or how we want to think about our contracts that we make with both external presenters or with musicians that come play with us and things like that. So that was kind of how I was pulled into the orbit of ICE from myself, what felt like a kind of a peripheral role to kind of weave in and out of the main sequence, but finally right in the thick of it at a pivotal time.
That's
great. I kind of meandered a bit, but I hope I addressed the question.
Yeah, I totally answered the question for sure. And I think when I just look back when you're telling that story, I kind of harken back to, okay, I got dragged into a lot of the stuff, that you were doing just as your plus one. Mm-hmm. And it was also weird to see like, other people evolved, and it's like somewhat part reunion, part not. Yeah. But really excited to see how the organization has evolved and I guess adulted, right? and had to in that sense. So Eric, I'll turn to you. I'm a lot closer to the story with On-Site Opera and everything that you've been going through, but still a really phenomenal journey. So
Yeah, I just want to say for a second, what you bring up about the reunion aspect of the network. I mean, I don't know about both of you, but that for me is part of the fun. Networking is fine, connecting with new people, but to have the opportunity to reconnect with somebody who you have this very different experience with, um, in a new capacity. That's so, what is Christine doing now? What's she like now? I just remember like having coffee in the student union with you on on those awful couches. And now here we are. So it's just these moments for me, it's really fun. So my little sidebar. So on-site opera, Christine, I have to credit you with drawing the line from Oberlin to the genesis of the company, because I never really did until you started talking about it. And this was a couple of years ago. But yeah, at Oberlin, the facilities for student productions were wanting quite a bit. And so it really forced everybody, whether you were a budding stage director or you wanted to put on a recital somewhere that wasn't in one of the normal spaces, it it forced you to be inventive and creative and follow that brochure Oberlin experience, that thread of independence. And being a director, needing to, because of my major, find a space to do my capstone projects, or else I couldn't get my degree. Trying to scour campus for the right place to do things. And I think because of the limitations on what students had access to, I accepted it as normal, and it just opened up all these possibilities. And nothing was weird. It wasn't, oh, this is really terrible, I have to perform here and not here. It was a really exciting challenge. And I didn't realize how much I took that with me throughout the early part of my career, that it followed on one thread, a very normal trajectory of traditional companies. But there came a point where I started to self-produce, and it was never in a place that was normal, traditional, anything like that. And then when the time came when on-site opera was this germ of an idea, the idea of site-specific opera just sort of came about in a fever dream. It was this very bizarre kind of experience of, well, I don't want to do this traditional stuff, but what can I do? What seems interesting to me? And there was this invisible connection to the resourcefulness that we all had as students. And lo and behold, it with a little more life experience and a couple more dollars, it could turn into something else. But never would I have imagined it would have been a full-time business. At the beginning, it was very much an outlet for me. It was a way to find this or scratch this creative itch that I had, that was generated because of some other work I was doing. And I didn't think it was ever going to be something bigger. And then I think much like ice, it really connected with people and connected with an audience who, outside of a group of Oberlin students who of course go to a contemporary music ensemble concerts, at large there was this much bigger crowd. And so they are equally as responsible, the audience, for bolstering this business. And now we're not as old, on-site opera is not as old as ice. We are only 12 years old. But much like Claire, at a certain point, and I recently I stepped away. I decided it was time to let my baby fly. But yeah, to think about the really long arc of this, I again have to credit you, Christine, with discovering for me.
That's crazy. But I love the fact that you guys also said like the reunion aspect of it. To me, it's like, oh, Eric's directing here. You had a show here. If I happened to be in the same city at the time, like it gave me to want to come out and see, or that I would just randomly run into you at a show that I didn't even know that you were directing. There was always those like random moments, but there is that piece of connection that kind of keeps you engaged within the network. And I think that's what's super exciting. And I think for me, I'm so spoiled because of just Oberlin and just my experience of opera is when someone sings right in front of me in rehearsal, as opposed to like sitting in the cushy seat. Like I like that grit backstage kind of feeling, because that's how, you know, I just know it. And what also has got me out, even by the time I moved to New York, was I only go out because I know that someone is performing, or someone, a friend, or that I'm supporting exactly, you know, ICE and the musicians there, or going to onsite opera. And you know, you've hired a lot of our friends too, and alums over the past. And that was really kind of the impetus for me to even just want to go out and support the arts. And to your point, Will, like we can have a whole segment around, you know, who's a donor at the arts and why. And so, you know, and I think that was kind of where that is. But I want to just talk a little bit about, right, like, so outside of the music, right, if there's a business opportunity, it's easy to say, hey, you know, let's connect the network, et cetera. And because there's something in it for someone, right, from a profit perspective when you're trying to business. When you're trying to think about it from just like a larger piece of like, you know, just having your network and keeping in touch, we've done such a good way of doing that. And part of it is because I will always find you guys and pick up the phone. So, and, you know, from a friendship perspective to really have that. But, you know, as people are watching this and are thinking about the power of the network, this is so awesome that you guys are friends and that you were in college together. But there's a lot of younger people who are starting to establish their network, right? What piece of advice would you give for those younger people who are just starting to establish their network, to think about how do they build their network and how do they continue to fuel their network and, you know, maintain it? So, I mean, for us, it was a little bit more organic, because like we're friends, and we always find moments to do that. Like even the pandemic, right? We all did like, you know, Zoom happy hours because we were going crazy. So, to find those connecting points. But, you know, just wanted to bring that up and see if you guys have any advice for the younger generation as they think through networking.
Yes. First, I guess I should say it then. And I think this works both ways, because karma and networking is another episode entirely. But always take the meeting. Always. I have people reach out to me. They're really starting out in their career. They want some advice about how to be a director, what they should do. And look, we're all really, really, really busy. And it's so easy to say, no, I don't have time, or ignore the email. But it's a half an hour of your time. And it can mean so much. And I have now, unfortunately or unfortunately, we're all old enough where I am seeing people who I offered advice to many years ago now being the ones who are offering advice to a younger generation. So, you know, our first crop of mentees is coming up, and now I'm reaping the benefits on the opposite side of that sort of networking karma. In that, as I am in the midst of a career transition, I am the one reaching out to other people for advice, cold reaching out to people, and the warmth with which I've been received, and people just taking a half an hour out of their time to chat. The other piece of advice I would give to a younger person is, don't pretend like you know what you're doing at all. The more honest and transparent you can be about where you are in your career, don't try and fluff up your resume or experience. Just say, look, here's where I am. I want to be here. That's where you are. How do I get from here to here? There's a lot I don't know. So it's really about honesty, because networking is built on a foundation of eventual trust. And if you're BSing your way through all of this, that network has no chance of solidifying.
That's a really great piece of advice.
Yeah, that actually makes me think. A variation of that is also don't try to wow people. Like if you're early on in trying to form a network, don't try to form a network by impressing people and like trying to win them over. Really, that place of honesty, that was a good. I really agree with that too. And like part of that is also asking, like getting these conversations, just asking to engage people. and bringing them into your world. You don't have to try to convince people to join your whatever it is you're trying to get them to join by selling them this great idea. Sometimes just describe an idea and like gauge their responses, because over time those connections that are meaningful will also be the people that will help I guess pressure test your ideas for you too, and help you evolve in how you think and the things that you do. And interesting, always take the meeting. If you're in a corporate job and you're a corporate manager, I probably wouldn't advise that in the office, but as a personal networking, yes, always take the meeting.
Fair.
Yeah. I mean,
and to your point about pressure testing, what is I think really important for younger people to keep in mind, and also to your point, Will, about not needing to wow people, is that none of us does anything by ourselves in a vacuum.
Right.
That the progressive success we all achieve is because of all these other people, invisible or not.
100%. It's to take a analogy right from a show, it's the people that you don't see in the back. You know, if the show is going so smoothly and you see the transitions from one scene to the other and you don't hear anything or you don't see anything glitch, it means that someone has done their job, and it does take a village to put on something. And most certainly I look back at my entire life and my career, and there's no way that I would have achieved any of this without, you know, the people behind me, including the friendships that I have with both of you. So, you know, thank you. And I think that that's super important to acknowledge as well. I want to pivot the conversation a little bit to just really acknowledge the fact that we all have these amazing creative backgrounds and, you know, musical backgrounds. And I know, Eric, you're pivoting to join us in the corporate commercial side of the house, which is really exciting to watch. But, you know, a lot of people always just like, oh, wow, you're an opera singer in your corporate America. To me, it's not very different from my DNA. And I feel like so much about what I also talk about in the book was early in my career, I was very quiet about the creative side of me. Like there was like this whole thing that I'm stepping into corporate America. My background and my degree has nothing to do with anything that I'm doing in corporate America. Right? So I was very quiet about it. And it took a while for me to really come back into my voice and really embrace the fact that like, hey, I am really this creative and I have this opera singer of a background, and being able to show up as that authentic self. And part of it was also, there was also stigma like, oh, soprano diva in corporate America, no bueno. But there was also a fact that like acknowledging that you were part of the creative class also felt that there was some sort of devaluation of that. And I feel like I'm able to speak about it now because I'm at a very different point in my career where I can really champion the fact that being a creative is made me successful and is part of who I am, my story of what's made me successful. And I just want to like turn the camera to you guys, right? Because my background is not unique. You share the same thing, and you guys have also been successful in business. And I want to really just kind of acknowledge and lift that. What has being a creative or having that background, you know, done for you or make you very different in the corporate world and change your value? And I think the second part of that question is also like, well, I mean, I can wait till the second part of the question, but I just also want to say like, what's your relationship with the creativeness or the music as you kind of pivoted out, right? Obviously for me, still trying, but I haven't sung in 2 years for various reasons, but you know, we're getting there. Will, that black box behind you is screaming. Exactly. But I just
you've been a little lonely lately.
Yeah, just the creative value and how does that still factor within your lives today, right? So.
Yeah, for the first part, the creativity, you know, the word creativity, especially in certain business and leadership circles, is often used pretty freely, but I think you're tapping on, there's kind of a sense of a double meaning of creativity. Like creatives as a people, they're artsy or whatever, and then creativity and problem solving, it's actually all the same. It's really just flexibility of thought and willingness to assimilate other things, because with creative people, they're not actually pulling things like raw inspiration out of thin air. It's always an active synthesis from their own experiences and connections to their network, say. And so I think that's what creativity for me is, and really it's all part of the same thing. As far as some aspects of music that I think have enabled me in different ways, over the years, I'm not a data scientist or data analyst by any means, but I do deal with a lot of data, and I think score reading actually helps read large amounts and assimilate like large amounts of information in two dimensions at once a little bit more easily. That's one way. But I think also, when you think about, just go back to like thinking your way through your senior recital, and you're like, how am I going to get through this, I don't know, 50 to 70 minutes worth of music, and then also make it interesting for an audience. And in terms of the productions you're staging, Eric, like that's a thought that like you also have to assimilate when you're planning the productions too. But that translates for me into longitudinal thinking that as I've helped map out just organizational strategy at my company, or just visioning or doing more broad visioning work too. I think it's that thinking through time, not necessarily in a way that like, this is exactly how the next 2 years of this division are going to look, but thinking ahead and kind of seeing what that future path looks like, I think is the same kind of thought process and experience that I had trying to map through a 90-minute recital for people.
Well, that's great. And I think from my perspective, similarly, Will, that it's spatial. It's in a way that a lot of non-creatives just don't tap into. I think we all can, but it's not in your blood if you haven't been in piano lessons since you're 5 years old. You're in rehearsals, you're doing all these things. So the ability to look at anything, it's because you're right, the creativity of being an artist and the creativity in logistics and problem solving, you're absolutely right, are 100% the same thing. And that for me is what has paid a lot of dividends. And Christine, you're right. I think there has been a shift in the value of the creative in a non-creative environment, that it used to be this thing you had to hide of, I remember, I don't know why this sticks out, but I met an analyst who worked for Goldman Sachs years ago, and she's like, oh yeah, I have my master's in cello from Juilliard. I'm like, oh, that's really, really cool. It's like, yeah, but don't tell anybody. So there was this, I've left that all behind. I don't do that. That's irresponsible somehow. But more recently, especially in this transition that I'm in the middle of, I have found that there's this kind of retroactive street cred that we're all getting, because most of us in high school and earlier, we were the band kids, the theater kids, the music kids, and we're a very particular network of people. And now I'm in these rooms with people who did not have that experience. And on more than one occasion, I've had people say, oh my God, I always hire theater people because they really have their act together. They know how to get things done. And that, I think, is a huge benefit of what the creative brings to the non-creative environment. Is, we deal in the ephemeral, but it can't feel that way. Mm-hmm. A 75-minute recital can't feel in the audience like you're trying to get through it. A production can't feel like garbage because, oh, well, this closes next week. It's got to feel grand and permanent and take up space. And so the fact that we as creatives have to do that over and over and over again over the course of a year is something that, once it is realized what those hard and soft skills are, we're in huge demand for that level of thinking, for that ability to problem solve and to sort of resource what we're working on.
Yeah, no, it's like, if when people ask me what is it that you've learned, just picking up on what you said, right? Managing the optics in corporate America or anything you have, that's such a really important thing. And I think that's something that we learn, right? How we package things, how we manage the optics, that's really important. But for me too, fundamentally, like the study of music, the study of opera, the study of the humanities is a study of people. And to me, business is all about people, particularly for me, for marketing, right? In order for marketing to move consumers to purchase, it's rooted in creating emotional connections with people, which is so much the same as me standing on stage and trying to sing an aria and trying to make that connection. It's me understanding what's the story behind the brand, what's the story behind that brand, and how do I create that emotional connection between that story and the brand with a person, and take that step back within corporate America as an executive. It's about managing people. It's not about being the smartest person in the room or that individual contributor. It's understanding people, it's managing people. And then what excites me about my global role is that, you know, just that opera singer piece is studying cultures and being able to speak different languages and have that kind of relatability. And so at the start, you're right, in my career, I hid behind it. I was really kind of just terrified. But then I just, you know, kind of slowly started to kind of embrace it, right? You know, like this crazy Asian lady who starts to speak perfect Italian. It's like, where did that come from? And I was like, I'm explaining that I learned Italian because I'm an opera singer, and this is just it kind of, you know, it kind of jars people, and it's taken a while for me to kind of come into my own skin for that. And I think that there's a lot of value in, if there's some things that I want people to take out of the book, is, you know, not just about the idea of bringing your authentic self, but I hope I also do justice for the people within the creative class to empower them to know that there's value in their skills, and, you know, really value what we bring in corporate America, and also just really truly value within, you know, the creative class, the discipline of what we have to go through, of hours of rigorous practice. And you know, Will, you went through my whole Carnegie Hall thing. I was traveling like a fiend. Like, I was like, do we have a practice room in Chicago? Like, there's a studio. It's not quite a piano, but, you know, there, you know, we'll figure it out. But it just that discipline, and people don't really understand kind of like that grit and that work. And there's that really brings to the table of what you want to achieve, you know, as a person. So I you know, that's my 2 cents. I don't know if anyone else kind of adds on to that, but yeah.
So something you started describing a little bit before reminds me, you know, one thing that's been clear in my my roles, I like to call them office roles, is there's a performative aspect too. And I think people are sometimes apt to acknowledge that and think about it as public speaking, but it's more than just public speaking. I think you mentioned connecting with people, and that's really what it is. It's like, if you think the conversations we have with somebody in our network where we're trying to ideate or solve a problem or something, those connections kind of make themselves, and the conversation can be organic. But the whole point of the performative aspect, it's not that it's going through motions in front of an audience, but it's that you're trying to have that same kind of connection and inspire or get some kind of reciprocal thought in your audience, in a setting that's not a one-on-one conversation. And so I think there's value in that. And I think some of our experiences help us understand how to gauge that connection. I mean, I'm not the best public speaker, but I think being able to tell the vibe in a room and know what people are latching onto, or what words I'm saying that they're struggling with, can help me respond more in the moment too.
Eric, anything else to add?
Only that all of that data that they toss around about, if children learn an instrument, it is some double-digit percentage increase in scholastic aptitude and things like that. And it's real. I mean, Will, you're absolutely right that that performative element, even if you are shaking in your boots, you have to get up on stage and you have your program to play. And there's that totality of the performance. It's not just how well can you play the piano, but how well do you perform the whole thing. And I think that's something that that creatives relate to more than non-creatives. It's that holistic quality to it, needing to your earlier point, Christine, the optics of everything, not just the task at hand, but who you are, what you're doing in a grander sense.
So at this point of the podcast, we endorse Mozart for babies.
Right.
Of course.
I mean, I'm biased. Mozart for babies. Mozart anything. So correlation between Mozart and genius. I'm teasing, but yeah, it's true though. I appreciate you guys so much, and thank you so much for jumping on this podcast. Thank you for the crazy journey.
Thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope this has inspired you to continue the fight for equality, challenge stereotypes, and lift as we climb. Amplify the conversation on social media, following @DuquesseCD and DuquesseCD.com. #Shattering Glass in Heels.